What if the leader of the world's most secretive nation disappeared, and no one noticed? For exactly 72 hours, Vladimir Putin vanished from all official records. No motorcade. No communication. No trace. When he returned, he looked the same. Spoke the same. But something was off. Subtle. Mechanical. Almost rehearsed. In this video, we follow the trail hidden beneath Kremlin corridors, tapes that shouldn't exist, and letters written to futures that never happened. This isn't a conspiracy. It's a story left behind, one that Russia never dared to tell. What really happened during those 3 days? And what if the man who came back wasn't the one who left? The silence after midnight. It started with silence. Not the quiet kind that slips into the night, but a calculated absence, like a breath held too long. On a cold Tuesday night, at exactly 0:14 a.m., President Vladimir Putin's encrypted motorcade GPS blinked out somewhere between the Novoogoryovo residence and a private intelligence compound known only to 5 people in Moscow. The signal wasn't jammed. It wasn't hijacked. It just disappeared. For the first hour, no one panicked. Technical glitches happened. Encrypted systems sometimes went dark and then came back. But by 1:03, when both the secure Kremlin line and the backup sat link failed to reach him, the command room and the Federal Protective Service went from casual indifference to lockdown procedure. No voice. No trace. No protocol breach. Just absence. By 2:10, an emergency closed-door meeting convened in a sub-basement 2 levels below the Kremlin, where the light never touched the floors and phones were forbidden. Only 3 officials knew the truth by then. Putin hadn't just vanished from radar. He'd vanished from time. All CCTV feeds tracing his last known movement had timestamps misaligned by exactly 11 minutes. Street cameras glitched, elevators froze mid-floor, even digital clocks in nearby cars rebooted. But no explosions, no attacks, no enemy interference. Just temporal silence. An order was issued: do not notify the public. Do not activate transition protocols. He may return. That phrase, "he may return," was the only sentence stamped across the midnight brief handed to General Sergei Volkov, the man unofficially responsible for handling things that officially didn't exist. Volkov wasn't just a military man. He was Putin's last Cold War-trained handler. And that night, for the first time in years, he put on his field coat. In the Kremlin's secure archive vaults, Volkov accessed a file sealed in 2007. It was stamped in red, Z protocol/emergency continuity, non-biological. Inside were documents, maps, and a single photograph. It showed Putin in 1991, standing beside a man whose face had been scrubbed from the image. Behind them, the Berlin Wall freshly collapsed, and on the table in front of them, a sealed black envelope with no markings. The same envelope that had appeared briefly on Putin's desk during a televised cabinet meeting 2 weeks earlier. Observant analysts online had speculated it was ceremonial. But Volkov knew better. That envelope had followed Putin for over 30 years. At 5:15, a satellite ping showed the presidential car parked at an abandoned Soviet radio outpost deep in the Valdai forest zone. A team was dispatched. But by the time they arrived, there was no car. No guards. No heat signatures. Just an old transmission tape spinning silently in the control room. The recording? It wasn't in Russian. Or any known language. But Volkov recognized it. He'd heard it once, in 1988, during a failed psychic surveillance experiment in Murmansk, when the KGB still chased ghosts. By dawn, the Russian state machine was still operating. Briefings were read. Hands shaken. Troop movements coordinated. But behind the stage, chaos fermented. Only 4 people knew the truth: the president hadn't left the country. The president had left reality. And nobody knew if he was coming back. The tape that shouldn't have played. General Volkov locked himself inside Archive Room 9, the only chamber beneath Moscow where analog machines still hummed in secret. No cameras. No biometric locks. Just thick steel, coated wheels, and the distant sound of forgotten machines spinning magnetic reels. In his hand, the tape recovered from the Valdai outpost. It was old, too old, like a relic from the early Cold War, but it hadn't degraded. In fact, it looked freshly made. He placed it into the playback unit, fingers steady, breath not so much. The moment the reel turned, the temperature in the room dropped 3 degrees. Not from fear, there was a measurable change in the air, a stillness so unnatural even the clock on the wall paused for half a beat. Then came the sound. It wasn't language. Not in the traditional sense. It was layers, human and synthetic, ancient and modern, overlapping in frequencies that didn't exist in modern phonetic systems. Yet somehow, Volkov understood. Or worse, remembered. He had heard this pattern before. In 1988, a failed KGB experiment at Facility Voron 6 had attempted to induce nonlinear awareness in elite agents. Most subjects went mad. A few went mute. One died after reportedly speaking a phrase that hadn't been recorded but was felt by everyone in the room. The experiment was buried. Participants reassigned. And the phrase sealed away. Now it was back. And it was being played by a tape that shouldn't exist, from a location that no longer appeared on Russian maps. At 6:43, a silent alarm tripped beneath the Kremlin. Someone had accessed Putin's private residence in Novoogryovo. No break-in. No guards triggered. But an old camera, long thought inactive, captured a single frame. A man entering the president's private study. Not Putin, but someone who moved like him. Same posture. Same deliberate precision. The gait of a man used to commanding silence. Volkov stared at the freeze frame for hours. It wasn't facial recognition that confirmed the impossible, it was the presence of the envelope. In the man's hand. Again. Why would the president vanish, only for someone who looked like him to return with the object that had vanished with him? By noon, a ghost protocol kicked in. Not by order, by design. A contingency script coded directly into the Kremlin's early AI command interface. The message displayed in white Cyrillic text on a black screen. If he disappears for more than 6 hours, initiate mirror. Volkov had seen references to mirror in old GRU documentation. A psychological operation designed to test the boundary between identity and presence. But it had never been greenlit. Never used. Until now. As he stared at the phrase on the screen, a second notification popped up. He is in Room 0. Room 0 didn't exist. Officially. But if the system believed it did, that meant something, or someone, had triggered a sensor buried beneath over 40 meters of concrete and steel. Volkov descended the hidden elevator shaft beneath Archive Room 9. Few knew it was there. Even fewer had used it. At the bottom, he found a corridor covered in frost. And then the door. Thick. Unmarked. Humming. Inside, the lights were on. And at the center of the chamber, a chair. Empty. But above it, a screen flickered. Not showing live feed. But a loop. Of Putin. Sitting in that very chair. Speaking words that didn't match his lips. A voice playing from a source no one could locate. A loop that began before he disappeared. A face talking seconds ahead of its own movement. Volkov didn't touch anything. Didn't speak. He simply listened. Because deep down, he feared the truth more than the silence. This wasn't the first time Putin had vanished. It was just the first time anyone noticed. The other Putin. By the third day, something shifted. Not in the halls of government, not even in the Kremlin's shadow corridors, but in the behavior of people who knew Putin. His longtime press secretary paused mid-sentence during a briefing, glancing at the man beside her as if he were a stranger. His chief of staff, a man trained to suppress emotion, blinked more than usual, his hands twitching beneath the table. The defense minister excused himself from a briefing and never returned. It wasn't what this Putin was saying. It was how he said it. Words too perfect. Posture too precise. Eyes too still. Volkov watched the press footage from Room Zero, comparing it side by side with archived videos, posture analysis, eye tracking, micro-expressions. And there it was, a 0.4-second delay in blink timing, and most importantly, no left-handed gestures. The real Putin, a natural lefty, always tapped the desk with his ring finger when pausing. This one didn't. He took the footage, encoded it, and sent it through a non-Kremlin channel to someone he hadn't contacted in 20 years, Ekaterina Malikova. A former FSB behaviorist turned archivist, now living off-grid near Arkhangelsk. She replied within 5 minutes. That's not muscle memory. That's mimicry. Volkov's hands tightened. If Ekaterina was right, this wasn't a clone or body double. It was worse, someone trained for years to become him. He returned to Room Zero, where the tape still spun, where the loop still played. But this time, it had changed. Now the voice spoke directly to Volkov. "You're not ready." And then silence. A knock on the archive door. Unmarked. No scheduled visits. No one should have known he was there. He opened it slowly. Ekaterina stood in the hallway, coat soaked from snow, eyes wide. She hadn't traveled in years. No one even knew she was alive. "I didn't send that reply," she said. "Someone used my signature." Volkov stared at her, then back at the screen inside. "Then who told me?" "I don't know," she whispered. "But they've been trying to find Room Zero since 2001. You just let them in." Alarms blared. But only inside the room. External systems stayed quiet. It was as if Room Zero had split from the rest of the Kremlin. Volkov grabbed the tape and motioned to Ekaterina. "We're leaving." As they exited the corridor, lights flickered. For a fraction of a second, the screen showed not Putin, but someone older. Worn. A version of him that shouldn't exist yet. Or ever. Not a doppelganger. A possibility. The file Volkov grabbed had a stamped label, Convergence. It had been authored by someone signed simply as VP. Putin. But the signature was dated 1996, 5 years before he was elected president. What was happening wasn't about replacement. It wasn't about power. It was about timelines. The man who wrote the letter. Volkov and Ekaterina didn't run. They moved with purpose, following paths mapped decades ago for a crisis no one believed would come. Down forgotten stairwells, through maintenance corridors untouched since Brezhnev, they reached a communications room buried beneath the old archives. Inside, dust-covered consoles hummed to life as Ekaterina entered a 12-digit code only 3 people ever knew. The machine spat out a document. Typewritten. Unfolded. Dated July 4th, 1996. It was a letter addressed to the man I would become. The signature, Vladimir Putin. But the tone, it wasn't political or even strategic. It read like a confession. If you're reading this, then either I've failed or succeeded too well. You must remember, the envelope is not to be opened. Not by them. Not by us. It does not contain instructions. It contains decisions. Volkov stared at the words. He'd heard whispers of a document written during Putin's FSB days, when he began questioning loyalty, not to country, but to time itself. Ekaterina turned to him. "What if this Putin isn't from here?" "You mean a double?" "No," she said. "I mean from another iteration. One where he never came back." It sounded insane. But nothing about the last 48 hours had been sane. She reached into her coat and pulled out something strange, a photograph. From 1985. Leningrad. 2 Putins. Identical. Standing side by side. "I stole this from a forbidden archive," she said. "We were told it was a KGB training simulation." Volkov leaned closer. Behind the 2 men was a chalkboard. Written on it, "Convergence Initiative, Subject 1 returned." The truth was darker than duplication. Somewhere, in some version of Russia, something had gone wrong. A fracture in continuity. And someone, something, was using Putin as a fixed point to reconnect timelines. But why him? Because he never lost control. Never faltered. His image, his will, his mythos, they remained intact across history. A perfect anchor. And now that anchor was being tested. The letter's final line was underlined 3 times. "If the man you see does not question his own memory, he is not me." Volkov sat down hard. The man currently attending state briefings, speaking to the defense council, shaking hands with foreign dignitaries, had not asked a single question. No hesitation. No confusion. Just presence. A perfect performance. Ekaterina whispered, "There's still one place we haven't checked." Volkov knew. The old apartment in Dresden. The one Putin lived in during his final KGB assignment. It was off books, long abandoned. But if there was any trace of a fallback plan, it would be there. At 3:20 a.m., they crossed into Germany under false identities. No security detail. No satellites. Just 2 shadows chasing a ghost across borders. In a freezing apartment block, untouched since the collapse of the GDR, they found the door. It wasn't locked. Inside, on a table beneath layers of dust, sat the envelope. Still sealed. Unmarked. Waiting. The last 60 seconds. Volkov stood before the envelope as if it could breathe. Ekaterina didn't speak. Dust clung to the air like static. The room felt unanchored in time, like opening the door had broken something fragile and unseen. The envelope hadn't aged. Its edges were sharp, its weight precise. It looked like it had been placed there yesterday. Or tomorrow. Volkov reached forward but didn't touch it. "Think," Ekaterina said. Everything he did, vanishing, the tape, the message from 1996, it all pointed here. "To a letter?" he asked. "To a moment," she replied. He knew this would happen. He didn't write instructions. He created a test. Volkov finally picked up the envelope. Inside, a single Polaroid. The photo showed Putin standing outside the same apartment, wearing the same coat. But beside him stood another man. Same face. Same eyes. But with a faint scar that Volkov knew didn't exist now. There was no note, no date. Just the back of the photo marked with one phrase. One stayed. One watched. Volkov sat down hard. His hands trembled. Ekaterina whispered, "This isn't a disappearance. It's a convergence." Everything made sense now. The double who returned wasn't from here. He was from another iteration, another timeline where Putin didn't make it back. But he remembered the rules. The postures. The voice. Enough to pass. But not perfectly. Not to someone who knew him before the mask ever formed. At 5 a.m., Kremlin systems flickered. For the first time in 72 hours, the original GPS signal reappeared. The presidential car was back. Parked. Engine warm. Doors slightly ajar. Putin walked out of the forest 5 minutes later. Alone. No guards. No phone. Just a man in silence. He returned to Novoboryovo. Sat at his desk. Looked directly at the surveillance camera. And then spoke one sentence. He passed. Then he pressed a button on his desk. The envelope, the other one, burst into flame. The next day, he attended a public forum, joked with schoolchildren, smiled for the camera, spoke about future reforms. But something was different. Not in his words. In the way his left hand tapped the desk. Ring finger. Precise rhythm. 4 taps. He hadn't done that in years. Volkov, watching from Archive Room 9, nodded once. The man in the Kremlin was him. The real one. The one who came back. But from where? No one ever asked what happened during those missing 72 hours. They didn't need to. The Kremlin went quiet. The tape was sealed again. And the letter? It was burned. But deep beneath the archives, in a vault only 3 keys could open, Volkov kept one thing, the Polaroid. He placed it inside a new envelope. Marked it in red ink. To the man I may one day become. Then he locked it away. Just in case. Some questions are meant to be asked, even if the answers are never given. If you found this story as fascinating as we did, make sure to subscribe for more untold moments from behind the headlines. Like the video, share it, and drop your thoughts in the comments. What do you think happened during those 72 hours?